I am not a fan of Joe Biden's candidacy. He supported the devastating invasion of Iraq and wasn't honest about it when challenged. He opposes important progressive policies like Medicare for all. He fumbles constantly with offensive gaffes. And even on the Palestinian struggle for freedom and justice, an issue that I've dedicated my entire adult life to, I think Biden will unfortunately be an enabler of Israel's denial of freedom to the Palestinians, as he insists on funding Israel's brutal occupation and apartheid with billions in US taxpayer dollars. And that's not even half of what's wrong with candidate Biden. But let's be clear about something. In a choice between Biden and Trump as president, there is absolutely no question that Trump would do far greater harm to the country and to the world if he's given 4 more years to carry on with this carnage. And that's why we have a moral obligation to elect Joe Biden, in spite of everything we rightly find objectionable about his candidacy. Now, there are 3 bad arguments that progressives make against voting for the Democratic candidate that merit a response. Number 1, Trump is no worse than Biden. Thankfully, this one doesn't come up too often, so I won't spend too much time on it. Here's just a short list of how Trump has decisively made the world a far worse and more dangerous place. Devastating the country by responding to the pandemic with nothing but foolishness and demagoguery. Gutting environmental protections and putting us on the road to environmental disaster. Separating thousands of children from their parents and caging them. Time out. If your first instinct just now was to say, well, Obama did it too, you're engaging in a false equivalence. Yes, Obama had his own problematic immigration policy, but there's a huge difference between the rare separation of children reserved for cases where there's a good reason for it under Obama, and Trump's blanket policy of separating thousands of children for no good reason. Now back to our list. Inciting violence by promoting conspiracy theories, sharing dangerous doctored videos, and just flat out calling for violence. Engaging in race baiting and completely normalizing bigotry, hatred, and division in our discourse. Instituting a travel ban targeting Arab and Muslim countries. Cutting more than $100 million in desperately needed aid to Palestinian refugees and endorsing land theft abroad. Abandoning critical international agreements and bringing us to the brink of war with Iran. Relaxing the threshold for civilian casualties and causing thousands more in innocent deaths in US bombings abroad. Having an unprecedented capacity for constant and incessant lying, making the truth itself an entirely meaningless concept. I could literally triple this list without skipping a beat, but I think the point's made. Number 2, the lesser evil is still evil. Symbolic morality is easy. All you have to do to be pure is just sit on the sidelines and never have to dirty your hands with politics. But consequential morality is about reducing harm in the world, and that sometimes requires us to engage in unsavory choices. In every area of life other than politics, everyone understands perfectly that there are degrees to badness, that there's a difference between bad and worse. Would you rather fail just one college course or your entire college semester? Would you rather a fire burn down your stove or your entire house? Would you rather lose your pinky toe in an accident or your whole leg? Yes, we get that both options in all of these situations are bad, and certainly no one should be excited about losing a toe or failing a college course, but we have enough common sense to choose what's less harmful to us. And politics should be no different. Voting for a candidate doesn't mean that you fully endorse them as a human being, or that you commit to supporting whatever they decide to do in office. On the contrary, it only means that you're making sure your voice counts in choosing who our opponent will be in the White House. And I say opponent because power politics is inherently corrupt, and no matter who we put in power, chances are extremely high that they will do harm that we're going to have to organize against and fight. The only question is, do you want to organize for progress against an establishment candidate who has become better on many issues due to progressive movement pressure, but who still needs to be pushed a lot more? Or would you rather your opponent be a fascist-leaning orange monster, who is entirely devoid of a moral compass, and who is deeply committed to a mission of destroying any prospect for progress? If we're serious about improving the world, that's a straightforward choice. Number 3, withholding my vote will push the Democrats to become more progressive. Let me agree that I too am frustrated with the Democratic establishment being out of step with the progressive base, and I agree that we need to push them and hold their feet to the fire. But first, it's not clear that lack of participation in a presidential election is all that effective. Half the country doesn't vote. How much impact do they have on candidates' positions or the number of viable parties contending for power in our system? Sadly, not much. They're generally ignored, and politicians are busy trying to court likely voters. So joining the ranks of the politically marginal might not be the best way to make your voice heard. But there are plenty of opportunities to actively push the Democrats in a more progressive direction, And they're demonstrably working. Organize voters, do public education, run for delegate, support real progressives running for public office, and fight during the primaries for better candidates and for their ideas. The Democratic Party has grown a progressive wing and is becoming more responsive to that wing precisely because of these kinds of efforts, and we need more of them. But once the primaries are over, and no matter how upset we are with the fact that our more progressive candidate didn't win, we have to face the reality that we're down to one of two choices in the general election. If our idea of punishing the Democratic establishment for not being more progressive entails allowing Trump to continue caging and deporting migrant children, then we have to consider that a major consequence of our strategy is putting very vulnerable people at risk. And even entertaining that thought comes from a position of relative privilege compared to those whose lives would be ruined just so we can make a political point. So, come November, let's vote to remove this malignant tumor from the White House. Let's vote on this guy and avert multiple disasters, but then let's fight like hell against the Biden administration to make them do better, because they will still be our opponents in the struggle to make a more just world.